Hello, and welcome to our third episode of Bicycle Commuting 101. This episode, we're going to be talking about the basics of bicycle maintenance. My name is Jordan Evans. I'm a transportation planner at the Association of Central Oklahoma Governments. ACOG and Watch For Me are presenting this webinar series. ACOG is the leading voice for regional collaboration in Central Oklahoma. Our organization is a voluntary, nonpartisan association of local governments. This includes 37 cities and 4 counties. Our mission is to advocate for regional cooperation and address common issues, solve mutual problems, and promote efficient government services. Watch For Me, OK, is a public awareness campaign from ACOG in the city of Oklahoma City. Watch For Me, OK seeks to educate the public on the rules of the road and aims to keep our residents safe while traveling. So this is the third episode in our Bicycle Commuting 101 series. We've had 2 before this, and they're both recorded and live on YouTube. We'll have one more next week. It'll be next Tuesday at 7. We'll be talking about bicycle commuting as a parent, and we'll have Tony Carfang as the speaker for that one. Today's speaker is Marty Buchanan. Marty is a certified bicycle mechanic with over 14 years of experience in local bicycle shops. Originally from Wales, Marty moved to Oklahoma City in 2006 and started working at Schlegel's Bicycle in 2007. Marty worked his way through the ranks from bike builder to junior tech to senior tech and service manager. He left Schlegel Bicycles in 2019 and joined REI as the certified technician in their bike shop. When not wrenching on bikes, you can find Marty riding his mountain bike or on his kayak at one of Oklahoma's many lakes. So I'm really excited for this episode. Marty is on the line, and I will turn it over to you.
Jordan, thank you very much. Very appreciate that. Very nice welcome, and thank you to you for being here. Thanks to everybody that's live with us this evening, and thanks to anyone that's going to be watching this when it's recorded and played back later. Being asked to kind of narrow down some of the basics of bike maintenance to 45 degrees is a bit of a task. Anybody that knows me, that has ever talked to me about bikes over the years, knows that I can talk at great lengths about these things and in great minutiae. So I will try and keep this as light and informative as possible, whilst as well getting some good information across to you. So some of the biggest questions that I get asked in the shop, just in general, are what can I do to keep my bike in good working condition? What can I do to maintain my bike? How do I adjust X, Y, and Z on the bike? And without wanting to get into too big a detail, probably one of the biggest things that you can do as either a new bike owner, a seasoned bike owner, or just somebody that wants to get the most out of their bike is to keep your bike clean. So I'm going to start this presentation this evening. We're basically going to go through 3 sections. The first one's going to be cleaning the bike. The second one's going to be some basic bike maintenance, or as I prefer to call it, a pre-ride checkover, which are things that you can do just to ensure that the ride that you're going on that day is as hassle-free as possible. And the third thing I'm going to go over is a very brief synopsis of how to change a tire or tube within a tire whenever you get a flat. So hopefully those 3 things, we can kind of narrow them down to smaller segments, should give a good overall foothold in this thing of bicycle maintenance and just bicycle well-being in general. Most of us have had bikes for years. Some are just getting into it, but last year being the craziness that it was, we certainly saw in my bike shop at REI a massive purchase of bikes. And in fact, that's also happened locally, not just at REI, citywide, statewide, and nationwide. Right now, the entire country is in a shortage of bikes. We're starting to crawl back out of it, but we saw a lot of people buying a lot of bikes really quickly. And as is often the case, just to be able to get out there and enjoy the outsides. With last year being what it was definitely a case of people were looking for activities to do rather than destinations to visit. So having got the bike, the next question was well, how do I take care of it? Still a lot of shops, ourselves included, we were closed down for many months. So people really need to know how to work on their bikes and just how to do some of the basic stuff. So as I said, like pretty much like one of the prime things that I do when we're talking about taking care of a bike is to clean the bike. Cleaning a bike is, as are many things within my chosen career path, not as easy as they may seem. I'm sure we've seen many videos of people spraying down their bikes after rides on mountain bike trails or on roads, or if you get caught out in bad weather, and we'll hit it up with a pressure washer. I can categorically say that pressure washers and bikes don't really mix with one another. Yeah, I mean, you may see videos of professional bike mechanics doing this. That's because they're normally able to get their hands on many thousands of dollars worth of spare equipment, so that when they're blasting the bike with a pressure washer, they can replace those parts. Unfortunately, myself, and I imagine many of you, don't have thousands of dollars worth of parts easily and readily to hand. So we just have to take care of our bikes a little bit better. So I've got a couple of, let's just see if I can get into this show. I'm going to just show a couple of the basic tools which I would use when cleaning the bike. So the first great thing that you can get when learning to work and specifically cleaning your bike is a good set of bike brushes. Now, you don't necessarily have to have specific bike brushes like this. You can use any soft bristle brush. A 4-inch painter's brush would be good. But the one on the left here, this large wide bristle brush, that's pretty much a great one just for cleaning a lot of the frames, wheels, etc. The other two brushes in the middle are definitely more for getting into some of the small crevasses in a bike, any small parts that you need to kind of really scrub. And the odd looking one over on the right here with, looks a little bit like a toothbrush, but with a hook on the back side of it, that's for cleaning into the gears, which are in the back of the bike, your cassette, all of the individual cogs and gears back there. That'll help to get really like right down into the nitty gritty of that. So the other thing which you'll find as far as cleaning the bike goes is that you get a lot of dirt and grime generally accumulate on the chain, on the drivetrain. Unlike a car where the engine's hidden underneath the hood, a bike's drivetrain, its engine for all intents and purposes, and its gearbox are all on the outside. So anything that gets thrown up from the ground will very easily accumulate on said bike. Anybody that's run their finger down a chain on the bike will quite frequently come away with it being covered in black grease. So cleaning the chain itself is another very important thing that you can do to a bike, and should be done pretty frequently as well to extend and maintain the life of the drivetrain. So just going to pop up a piece of equipment, particularly favorite piece of equipment of mine. So this is a chain cleaner. Also, as you probably remember from the previous slide, the brush down the bottom there is the brush for cleaning the cassette. But the large item at the top left here, that is a chain cleaner. That will actually wrap around the chain, and then the fluid, which is right next to it, that will go into said chain cleaner. So you don't have to sit there with your chain and a small toothbrush diligently cleaning away at this thing, because that will take a significant amount of time. This fantastic tool, piece of equipment here, will do it in an absolute fraction of the time. So Cleaning the bike itself, having a good set of brushes. If you're able to get the bike outside, even better, because you're going to be making a fair deal of mess here. I'll always say probably one of the best things that you can do for cleaning a bike, if you don't necessarily want to get a bike-specific cleaner, Dawn dish soap. Dawn dish soap is a fantastic piece of equipment, always good to have in a bucket for doing bike cleaning. Dawn is a degreaser. It is an incredibly strong degreaser, and if you use neat to get rid of some like really aggressive grime parts on your bike, great. Pop it into a good squirt of that into a bucket of water as hot as you can physically stand. Get some good suds up, and then say either with just a towel rag or the widest bristle brush that you have, basically scrub that all over the bike. Start from the top, work down. Same is going to be when we're going to be cleaning everything off. Start from the top of the bike and work down, because gravity will naturally drag everything down. If you clean the bottom and then work your way up, you're just going to drag all the dirt back down over what you just cleaned. So start from the top of the bike, work down. Don't be shy about really scrubbing this stuff with a soft bristle brush and dish soap. You're not going to damage anything on your bike. When you finish scrubbing and you're convinced that you've got all the dirt off it, I would use a regular garden hose. The open end of a hose, as far as the amount of pressure that you can put on a bike when you're washing it, I said at the very top of this, the pressure washers were out. But if you have a regular garden hose and you put your thumb over the end of the garden hose, when you kind of compress it down, that kind of jet that you can get out, that's about as aggressive a water blast that you'd ever want to put onto a bike. When the bike's completely rinsed off, again, starting from the top, working to the bottom, towel dry, or if you've got the time and it's a sunny day like these last couple of months have been, just leave the bike outside to dry, just naturally, and then just re-lube the chain. Bike lubes are something which are quite specific. There's quite a few different brands, different makeups of bike lube for your chain. They normally tend to follow the category of either being a wet lube or a dry lube, and that relates to the conditions that you can be riding in. Wet lubes will be better at staying on the chain in wet conditions. So if you're frequently riding in the rain, if you live on the coast, if a lot of people taking their bike, I know will take you to a less dry climate than Oklahoma, take it up to the Pacific Northwest, then I always suggest them taking a wet lube, because it will inherently be rainy when they get up there. The dry lubes are still liquid, but they are better at working in dry conditions. Both have got their pros and cons. If you use a dry lube in a wet condition, then it will wash off your chain very easily. Great for dry conditions around here. If you use a wet lube in dry condition, then it's going to attract a lot more dirt and dust. So definitely, when you are relubing the bike after you clean everything off it, and you relube that chain, definitely only use the right lube for the right conditions that you're going to be using. So if you're around here, dry lube is going to be your best friend, and realistically, I sell probably 80 to 20% dry lubes for customers that come in shop that want a chain lube specified to them. So cleaning a bike is definitely one of those things that will not only prolong the life of your bike in general, makes the bike more pleasurable to ride, will also get you in your good graces with your bike shop mechanic if you have to take your bike into the shop, because every mechanic loves working on a clean bike. But if the bike comes in filthy dirty, then normally the first thing we have to do is clean the bike before we can work on it. The age-old adage, clean bike is a happy bike, is most definitely applies here. So that's bike cleaning in a nutshell. Use dish soap, either a specific set of cleaning brushes, the drivetrain, the chain cleaner that I just showed for cleaning the drivetrain, then washing with just regular hose water. Most amount of pressure you want is just your thumb over the end, towel dry or air dry, and then re-lube with the appropriate lube for your climate. So that's bike cleaning. The next thing I want to cover is the pre-ride checkover. Now, without getting into too much detail, because it is very easy to get rolling and really go down rabbit holes that, as far as people necessarily having experience or not having experience of working on their bikes, I could be talking in technical jargon that is just going to fly over people's heads and isn't really going to register a lot. So I just want to focus on some basics. Primarily, what you should be doing to your bike before you go out and ride it. A lot of the times I see people when they get into trouble when they're out on rides is because some of these basic checks haven't been done. And so it's definitely one of those things whereby you can get into a lot of trouble if you head out, or even not so much trouble, but you can just not have a very pleasurable ride if you head out without taking care of these pretty basic things to look out for. So I'm going to pop open a slide, which will just make it easier when I go over these next couple of things, that we actually have some points of reference, as I would love to have a bike behind me. Simply with a webcam, I don't have the ability to be able to do that. So let me just pop open the next best thing, which would be a bike diagram. So what we have here is a very stylistic diagram of a bike, but it actually gets across most of the main points. Your bike, if you have a road bike, you're going to be having different handlebars on there. If you have a mountain bike, it may look a little bit different to this. You may have disc brakes instead of rim brakes. Multitude of different things that could be different to this very basic diagram, but we get the general points will come across, and they'll be applicable to all bikes, whether it's an adult bike, child's bike, tandem. All of these things will pretty much transfer across to whichever bike it is that you're going to be riding. So I have a tendency when I'm working on bikes to work from the back of the bike to the front of the bike. It makes sure that I hit all the major points when I'm going through and doing this. It also is quite methodical, and it makes sure that I don't miss anything as I'm going through. So starting off at the back of the bike, the first line item that we have in the text box over on the right-hand side here is loose skewer / play-in hub / tire. So by that, I mean the skewer, the part that attaches the wheel to the bike. What I will do is physically put my hand on that skewer and just make sure that that is tight. If you don't have a tight skewer, the wheel itself can physically move around. Worst case scenario, the wheel can physically come out of the bike, which would be a bad time for all involved. So definitely want to make sure that the wheel is securely attached to the bike. Some bikes will have a skewer, a small lever that sits in the middle of the bike itself that attaches it. Some bikes will have a nut that sits on the end that basically gets tightened down with a wrench. Whatever method that you have of attaching the wheel to the bike, you just want to make sure that that is secure. The play-in hub, basically you will, to check to make sure that the wheel, whilst the wheel may be secure to the bike, that the bearing set, which is in the middle of the wheel itself, and the hub in the center part of that wheel, that hasn't started to come a little bit loose. So you can grab the wheel with one hand, the top of the wheel with one hand, grab the bike with the other hand, and try and waggle one from one side to the other just to see if there's any movement. You can expect a little bit of flex, but you don't want to have a definite knock-to-knock, side-to-side motion on there. If you do, I highly recommend not riding your bike that time. Try and get it into your local bike shop and have a professional look at it. The third thing is tire, in section 1 of this. So by tire, I mean just giving the tire a spin, check around very slowly, go through the entirety of the outside of the tire, and you're going to be looking for any foreign objects that could be stuck in the tire that could potentially cause you a puncture while you're out riding. Also just generally checking the condition of the tire, making sure that it's not bald, there are no cuts in the tire. There's nothing that's basically going to potentially cause you issues while you're out on the road. A lot of times when you're out riding, you may actually pick up some of these foreign bodies, screws, nails, infamous Oklahoma goat's head burrs or stickers that we get if you ever ride through grass or through sand. These things may just sit on your tire without actually burrowing through the tire or penetrating or puncturing the tube that's within the tire. And as a result, if you go out and ride, you may actually cause them to go through and cause you to get that flat. So we want to make sure that the tire doesn't have any of these obstructions or any kind of obtrusions sitting in the tire before we even start off. So that takes care of the rear wheel. The next thing we're going to take care of is the rear derailleur. The rear derailleur is the gear mechanism that allows you to change gears on the back of your bike. It's pretty much akin to a gearbox in a car. So we want to make sure that that is working properly. We can actually shift through our gears without having to physically ride the bike. But the big thing that we want to do, and which is why I really do harp on about this, is if you stand behind the bike and look basically from the rear wheel forwards, we want to make sure that that derailleur is straight, it's vertically up and down, it's not bent in towards the wheel, or it's not twisted. When you're looking at a derailleur from behind, you should see the derailleur itself that is just sitting vertical. It's going to be in a vertical plane. If it's bent over towards the wheel itself, or if it's bent away from the wheel, not only is this going to give you very poor shifting on the bike, but it can also be potentially hazardous if it's bent towards the wheel. The fact that it can actually get jammed up in the rear spokes of the wheel and can really give you a bad day all around. It can definitely drag your ride to a very screeching halt. So if you have a rear derailleur that is bent in towards the wheel, most definitely don't go for that ride. Take it in towards, take it into your bike shop and have a professional adjust and straighten that up. The worst case scenario that I can think of with a bent derailleur is that the derailleur itself could go into the spokes, either break spokes in the wheel, or worst case can physically tear off and damage the frame. So for spending maybe 20, 30 bucks at a bike shop and getting that straightened up, you could save yourself several hundreds, if not thousands of dollars in repairs and potentially having to get a new bike. So definitely don't want that to happen. So if you look from behind the bike at that rear derailleur and you see that it's not straight up and down vertical, it's bent over towards one side or the other, definitely take it into a shop and definitely get it taken care of. The third circle on the diagram here is for the saddle and seat post. You want to make sure that your saddle is properly secured. Nothing worse than riding a bike and suddenly feeling like the world is coming up around you, whereas you're actually slowly sliding down and you're getting closer and closer to the frame. So just to make sure that whatever securing mechanism holds that seat post into the frame where the saddle's connected to, great way to check this is to stand behind the bike, clamp the bike between your knees, or the rear wheel, sorry, clamp the rear wheel between your knees so that you're holding the saddle in front of you. One hand on the front of the saddle, one hand on the back of the saddle, and try and twist it side to side. You shouldn't be able to twist the saddle at all. Likewise, while you've still got your hand on the front and back of the saddle, try and pull the saddle nose up and then try and push it nose down. You shouldn't have any movement in the saddle, whether it's the seat post twisting or whether the saddle pitches nose up or nose down. The saddle should be a very secure and a very well installed piece of equipment on your bike. Normally, if you have something like a small lever at the bottom of the seat post where it attaches to the bike frame itself, just make sure that that's properly tightened, or if there's a bolt on there, just tighten that to the appropriate specifications so that you don't get that thing swinging around. Saying nothing more frustrating than getting out on a bike ride and having to stand up because your saddle fell off. So number 4 on our diagram is going to be cranks and pedals loose. So the cranks, the pedals, everything that propels the bike, that you as the engine of the bike physically propels the bike forwards with, that crank set, the part that your pedals attached to, right in the middle of circle number 4 on the diagram, that really is the heart and soul of your propulsion system on a bike. So you just want to make sure that that isn't starting to come loose, that there's no play in that at all, and that there's no wiggle to it. You expect it to spin freely, so you can just basically spin the cranks backwards just while you're sitting there next to the bike to make sure that it spins perfectly freely, but you don't want any side-to-side waggle. Likewise, with the pedals themselves, you want to make sure that the pedals are nice and tight into the cranks. If you have, most pedals will actually tighten with a 15mm wrench. You'll normally find a couple of flats either side of the pedal where it attaches to the crank itself. You can get a 15mm wrench on there, or there are some, again, bike-specific tools which solely do the job of making sure that your pedals are on there tight. Most bike shops will carry those, and they're not too expensive either, like $14, $15 for the proper wrench, just to make sure that those are tight. Because when you are riding your bike, you may be standing up on those pedals. You may have to put a lot of force down through them. If those pedals aren't securely fastened to the bike, they can't work their way loose, and when they do, you can cause some quite significant damage to the crankset. Most of the time, the crankset will have to be replaced. Sometimes it can be saved, but it's not cheap. So just basically putting a wrench on there, just making sure that those pedals are tight in and that the crank doesn't waggle around. Number 5 thing that you want to check over, and again, as you can probably see, we're moving slowly from the back of the bike to the front of the bike. So number 5 is the headset loose. The headset is a small bearing group that sits in the front of the bike, and allow your handlebars to turn side to side and consequently turn your front wheel and steer you around corners or keep your bike straight. The bearings in there can come loose, so one thing that you can do is just to, as you're standing next to the bike, if you grab the front brake firmly and then try and push the bike forwards and pull the bike backwards, and you may feel a little bit of flex, either from the fork of the bike or from the wheels, but what you shouldn't feel is any hard and definite knocking vibration. So you shouldn't feel like a knock when you rock it forwards and a knock when you pull it back. If you do, the headset bearings themselves are loose, and you absolutely should not ride your bike with a loose headset. Bear in mind that everything that is attached on the front of the bike are your control mechanisms, much the same as a steering wheel of a car. You definitely wouldn't drive your car with your rack and pinion steering mechanism loose, because if you lose control of your ability to steer, then you lose control of the bicycle at that point. So making sure that that headset is properly adjusted, very critical part of the pre-ride checkover. Say a little bit of flex, totally normal, but if you have that hard vibration forwards and backwards knock, when you're holding the front brake to kind of really stabilize and ground that front wheel, you don't want any forwards backwards knock at all. And then finally, whereas it could be regarded as number 6, it's number 1, but for the front. So basically, you're just going to copy everything that you did to the rear wheel, but to the front wheel. So making sure that the skewer or the bolts, whatever hold the wheel into the bike, are properly secured and are nice and tight. Making sure that there's no side-to-side knock with the wheel. Again, just like grabbing hold of the frame with one hand, grabbing the wheel with the other, and just kind of pushing it from side to side to see if the hub bearings are slightly loose. And then finally, just checking the condition of the tire itself, and just making sure that there's no foreign bodies, no intrusions, no goat's head burrs, nails, screws, pieces of glass, anything in the tire, and that the condition of the tire is good. Again, you don't want any cuts in the tire. If you do have a very defective tire, or if you can start to see threads coming through on the tire, if the tire itself is very threadbare, you absolutely need to get that replaced before you go out and ride. You do run the risk of suffering a potential blowout, and blowout on a bike is absolutely no joy at all. So that kind of drags us back from the pre-ride checkover. If we do these things before you go out and ride, then the chances are the ride itself will be way more enjoyable. You won't suffer some of these things. And if you do come across any of the problems whereby you have a particularly loose saddle, or your pedals are loose and you don't have the right tool to take care of it, or if you have a worn-out tire, that's definitely stuff that you want to take care of before you go and ride the bike. Invariably, the worst will happen when you're furthest away from home, and so you really want to get that stuff taken care of. If it means that you miss a ride today, but you can get on a ride in the next day or two, all well and good, better than being stuck out in the middle of nowhere without this kind of assistance. and having to call somebody to give you a lift home. So that's the pre-ride checkover 101 pretty much covered. I want to quickly jump into, for the next 15 minutes, tube changing. Now, for me, the idea and the concept of distilling down how to correctly change a tube into 15 minutes is like asking a marathon runner to do a 60-meter or 100-meter sprint. It's difficult. I've done this as an instructional class in the past. It normally takes an instructional time about an hour and a half with some hands-on. I have distilled it down to 5 minutes in the past, but it's an incredibly rushed way. And I do want to use some photos as well, which I've taken over the years to kind of illustrate some of this stuff, because some of it I'll be able to do on webcam. Some of it will be easier to use some pictures, so I'll kind of go between one and the other. A lot of people, when they are changing a tube in their bike tire, if it's on the front wheel, they'll do it. If it's on the rear wheel, they won't, because there's a lot of confusion and misunderstanding about the derailleur and the gears in the back. So that's why whenever I ever did a class on changing tires, I always did it on the rear wheel to demystify it somewhat. So let me just pop up the first quick slide that I want to show, which is the back end of a bike. So when you are going to change out, say, your rear wheel in this case, the first thing you want to do is move or shift your chain all the way down to the smallest cassette sprocket as it's shown in this. So you're furthest away from the middle of the bike. The chain is as far outboard as it can get. That will make it a lot easier for getting the wheel in and out of the bike in general. It also puts a lot less stress on the chain, and it stops you having to like cram your fingers into the chain to remove the wheel. The next thing that you want to do at this point is going to be actually remove the wheel from the bike itself. Sometimes the tire won't necessarily want to come out because there might still be a little bit of air in there and you want to clear the brake out. So if you have, in this case, this is specifically for a road bike and road bike brake caliper. If you have a different kind of bike, there are other ways that you can open the brakes. If you have disc brakes, you don't have to worry about this step at all. But the small gray strange shaped lever, which is above the S in closed and the O in open on there, you can kind of see the difference between one and the other. One is flipped down, one is flipped up. So to make sure that the wheel, when we put it back into the bike, is easy to get in there, then at this point we will open up that brake, that little lever on the brake, to make removal and reinstallation of the wheel later a lot easier. If there's some air still in the tube, you want to make sure before we even try to take the tire off that all that air is out. A lot of people are happy with the Schrader type of tire valves. Pretty much with bikes, we have two kinds. Schrader, which is it's identical to what you have on a car, and the type which is up on the screen right now, which is called Presta. A Presta valve has a small brass nut at the top of it. And actually, I'm just going to flick back to the webcam just to quickly show you here. So the Presta valve sits up at the top here. So this is how the Presta valve is normally closed. This is in its closed position. So you will physically unscrew said Presta valve just with fingers, and then you can depress it, and you'll get a jet of air will physically come out of the valve. When you've finished, and we re-inflated it, you just close it back down again. But the Presta valve, that valve section has to be open before you can start letting any air out. So you'll just unscrew that, and then simply depressing it will actually get the air out of the valve. So the action which you can see up on there, just just basically showing that in the left-hand photo there, the valve is open, and then you'll just depress it to release air from the valve. That's how you're going to get all the air out. We don't want any air in that tube. It'll make our job of removing the tire incredibly difficult. The easiest way that I have ever been shown how to remove a tire from a tube is to work on the basic principle that the tire and the tube which is inside it are a rubber ring. The wheel itself is going to be either a steel, carbon, or aluminum rim. The rubber will stretch, the wheel will not. So if you, and obviously this is a point of view, I have to give props to one of my work colleagues for taking this picture, because obviously both my hands are in the picture during this. I couldn't actually take the shot. If you stand over the wheel and then as you look down at it, the bottom of the wheel on the floor is at the 12 o'clock position, 9 and 3 either side, and the valve stem is up close to your body at 6 o'clock. So what you'll do is squeeze that tire using both hands. You're going to pinch the tire itself together all the way down and around until your hands meet up down at the 12 o'clock position. The main reason why you do this in this position is that you can use your body weight as you squeeze the tire and try and force it down and around the rim and off the bottom of the wheel. You can use your body weight to your advantage, and you can also force the tire and the tube down into the ground. You've got things that you can use, so you're not fighting the wheel, you're not trying to do this in mid-air. You can use your body weight as an assistance at this level. This is all about technique, not brute force. I've taught the class of how to change a tube probably several dozens of times over the years. I've had 90-pound women do this. I've had children do this. I've had grown adult men, 180 pounds and above, be able to do this. So it's not a matter of strength. This is definitely more a case of technique. It may take several times when you're doing this to physically stretch the tire down and around to get some slack in the tire before you can put a tire lever in to remove it. But doing this will actually kind of basically make the act of removing the tire a lot easier, just kind of stretching that tire down and around so that you have a little bit of excess of rubber at the bottom of the tire. When you do have that excess, at that point you can normally get a tire lever inserted in between the rim and the tire itself. The circumference of the tire is going to be smaller than that of the wheel rim itself. That way the tire doesn't just fall off. So you're going to be having to pull the bead, which is the part that basically locks into the tire. The bead of the tire, excuse me, the bead of the tire locks into the bead of the wheel. And so you're going to be unlocking one from the other. And that's where a good stout tire lever like the red one, which I'm using in these photos, that will actually hit underneath there. And then you can basically just push that around to follow the circumference of the wheel itself and release the tire, one side of the tire from the wheel. When you do, and actually I'm going to pause and come away from here just for a split second. So when you do actually get the tire off, or get that one bead off, at that point you can pull the tire, or you pull the tube, sorry, out of the tire. You also want to pull the tire completely off the wheel. Because what you need to do is check around inside the tire. You want to physically do check around the inside of the tire. You also want to do a visual inspection of the outside of the tire. So as you're visually looking at the tire off the wheel, your hands are doing like a tactile inspection of the inside of it. Always be very careful when you're running your hand inside a tire. If you've got a flat, there's a pretty good chance that something poked through there, and you don't necessarily want it to poke into your finger and cause you to get cut. So definitely be slow about taking your hand through the inside of the tire itself. Just actually quickly zip off camera, kind of show you the actual action. So when Unlike Carrot Top, I don't have all my props instantly to hand. So when you're checking through the tire's off the bike, you want to be doing, let's say, a visual inspection of the outside of the tire, the part that you've been riding on, but you also want to do a tactile inspection with your finger at the inside of the tire. So the best way that I've found to do this is if you basically line up your thumbs so that the four fingers of each hand, all your other fingers are inside the tire, and you can slowly pull down, and then you have an area there between your thumbs that you can look at the tire. That's your visual inspection. As you bring your hands down inside, you're feeling the inside of the tire, the part that you don't normally see. You're feeling that for anything that could be physically stuck in there. So you're going to slowly creep your way around. And what I normally like to do is find some mark on the tire. In this case, this tire has a good little information patch on it. I'd start there, and then as you work your way around, once you get back to that point, then you know you've done a full circle. Basically being very thorough and making sure that you can catch anything that could have been caught in there. When you've finished, flip the tire around and do the entire process again. I've had some people say that that seems a little bit redundant, but what I will say is that not everything that's going to stick through your tire is going to come through a straight angle like this. A lot of stuff will come through at a very shallow angle. And so if it was sticking through that way, you might miss it this way around, but you'll sure catch it coming the other way. So always worthwhile just checking around both the inside and the outside of the tire before you go putting a new tube in. Because the worst thing you can do is just take the punctured tube out and then blow up a new tube, put it in, and then whatever caused the flat is just going to puncture your new tube, and then you're kind of back to square one. So put a little bit of air into the tube, get the tire situated back on the rim, putting the one side of the tire bead back onto the wheel. That's very easy. You won't need any tools or any assistance to do that. When you put the one side in, it then gives you a pocket as well that you can put the tube back in. You can get the tube so the tube is sitting down inside the tire. When the tube's then sitting back down inside the tire, you'll end up with this kind of scenario whereby the tire is back onto the wheel, the tube is back inside the tire, but you just need to get that second bead hooked up so that you can inflate the tube to the recommended pressure. Hooking that bead back over, you're going to get to a point where as many people that might have had some issues putting a tire back on may have got to this point and then start breaking out the tire levers again. It's very, I'm not going to say dangerous because it sounds a little bit too exciting, but it can be very unfortunate if you get to this point and break out tire levers and accidentally snag the fresh tube that you've just put into the wheel. Because what can happen then is you're back to square one, except you're down a tube. So what I always like to do is recommend basically rolling the tire between your fingertips and the heel of your hand. You can get a lot of friction on that tire. You can also, as you're rolling the tire on or pushing it on with your thumbs, the tire itself will also start to warm up. It does make it a lot easier to physically manipulate the tire up and over the top. Then when you get your two thumbs almost touching one another, at that point you can normally just push the tire up over the top of the rim just with your thumb. You won't have to use any tools to put the tire back on. That would be a case of a poorly installed tire right there, where it hasn't physically locked back into the bead. The widest part there that's sticking up above where we have the black logo, where it says Shimano wheels above the S of wheels. If you were to reinflate your tube right now, the tube would basically burst out of there like a balloon and would explode. So we just want to make sure that the tire itself is properly seated all the way around. And that's a better instance if you go from that's obviously not seated and that is seated properly. One thing that you're also looking for is just ensuring that the tire is even all the way around. There are no high points and no low points. And then at this point, you would just go ahead and reinflate to recommended pressure. I never go to full pressure on any tires. If you were riding a road bike, certainly around Oklahoma City, you'd never go to like the maximum tire pressure that you'd ever have. Just keep it probably about 10, 15 psi below that. So for a road tire like we were just looking at for a drop handlebar road bike, normally around about 190 to 100 psi in your tires. Mountain bike around about 40. A hybrid bike probably about 60 psi. But on the side of the tire itself, there will be some information. This would be a bad example because it doesn't actually have it on there. But sometimes the tire itself will actually have some information on there to say a min and a max tire pressure. Say always keep it just a little bit underneath the max. Reinserting the wheel back up into your bike and then getting back on the road. Having opened up any brakes, you just want to close down the brakes, make sure that they're not rubbing, and then start off again. And in 15 minutes, I condense what I say would normally take me around about an hour and a half to get through. Obviously, without a lot of the normal props, which I have. But that's kind of tube changing 101 condensed in a very, very compact format. One thing I will say about reinflating, a lot of people will use either one of two options. If you have a small hand pump, or if you're in the comfort of your own home when you're doing this, then you have a floor pump that can just, or compressor, you can just air everything up right from home. That's great. If you're on the road and you're using a CO2, which is a small charged canister of CO2, you can very quickly reinflate your tubes with. A note on CO2. CO2 is a get you home fix. On a molecular level, CO2 is a lot smaller than air. And so if I was to repair my tube out on the side of the road and reinflate a new tube and use CO2 to inflate it, and I rode today on Tuesday and I didn't ride for another week, and I aired my tube up to, like, say 90 psi, in that week, because the CO2 will literally just like leach out of the side of the tire and the tube, I could have dropped 30, 40, 50 psi. Which means when I come back to my bike and I do my pre-ride checkover, one of the first things I'm going to do is check my tire pressure. And if it's down, I have to wonder, well, did I properly repair the flat that I got last time? So when you get home, if you ever do use CO2 in any of your tubes, dump all of that CO2 out and then replace it with regular compressor air or pump air, and that'll hold a lot better over the course of a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. You can always expect your bike tires to go to lose a little bit of air. Certainly, air will be lost a lot quicker than a car tire. I couldn't tell you the last time I aired up my car tires, and I know they're both at around about 30, 35 psi. But with my bikes, you have to pretty much check your tire pressure every week, and definitely make it part of your pre-ride checkover just to make sure that your tires are properly inflated. And with that, Jordan, I'm pretty much done, and I know that you possibly wanted to open this up to some Q&A.
Yeah, thank you. That was really great. I know bike maintenance and mechanical side was sort of a barrier for me when I got started. So learning this stuff is really great. I think that this is going to be a really useful tool for a lot of people. We do have some questions that came in, just a few so far, but if you have any others and you're listening, please submit those now. Our first question, what are some good indicators to know when it's time to change or update your bike?
So there's been a lot of this lately. Obviously, when everything hit last year, people were maybe digging bikes out of a garage that haven't been ridden for a while, and they weren't working as well, so people were wanting to get new bikes. The problem was last year you couldn't buy a new bike, so trying to get new stuff was pretty hard. So a lot of people were trying to make the old bikes work again. So indicators that you need to, sorry, I kind of went off on my own tangent there for a minute. Was the question when to replace parts, or?
Yeah, when to replace parts or when to replace a bike altogether.
Okay. When to replace a bike altogether. Certainly from a safety standpoint, if the frame or the major components are badly damaged, if you do get involved in a wreck, If any part of the frame is bent or damaged, absolutely don't continue to ride it. Every bike shop that I know will give a safety check for a bike. If you've had a wreck and you want it safety checked over, definitely get it checked over before you continue to ride it. So severe damage to a bike, 100% replace it. As far as the passage of time, there are things which are becoming more and more obsolete. We're seeing less 26-inch mountain bikes, for instance. So the 26-inch wheel is pretty much going the way of the dodo. It's still out there, but it's really hard to get parts for it. I have been a stalwart of the 26-inch wheel bike for years, but it's getting harder and harder to find quality products. So as a result, I've recently changed over to a different wheel size, a different kind of bike, just so that I'm able to get what is readily available. Also, some older components. When we talk about bikes, a lot of the times people may refer to the bike as being a 10-speed or a 20-speed. A lot of the times when we refer to the amount of gears that it has in the back, that's more of an indicator as to how old your bike is. A 10-speed road bike could mean that you have 10 gears in the back, or it could be a very old bike that has 5 gears in the back and 2 at the front. So some people will kind of mix and match what they entirely mean. But the older a bike is, a pretty good chance the less opportunity you're going to have for getting any good replacement parts for it. Or if you are able to get replacement parts, the quality level of those parts is going to be rapidly diminished. So damage to a bike, definitely time to replace it. Damage to components on even a new bike, definitely time to replace those. It's only going to be a matter of time before something's damaged, becomes terminally broken, and could cause a cascade effect. But just the age of the bike is normally a good indicator. Sometimes not even condition. Although condition, I will add into condition kind of wear and tear. You can have a brand new bike or a bike that you bought a couple of years ago, and if it's been left outside in the elements, things get rusted. A lot of the times they are way past the point of being repaired by a mechanic, and so things have to be replaced. And there's always this kind of sliding scale between, if a bike cost me $200, but I need to put $250 into it to get it repaired, but I can get another bike like the same level of the bike that I first got for $200. Why put $250 of repair work into a $200 bike? You're outstripping the value of that bike at that point. Unfortunately, whether it's through needs and means or sheer neglect, if the bike was left outside and it's just gotten rusted and crusted and it's just not able to be ridden anymore, at that point it's going to be better to replace rather than repair it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Our next question, are there any bike tools that you should take with you on every trip? And sort of a part 2 of this question, are there different tools that you should take versus on like a longer recreational ride versus a shorter commute ride?
Yeah, one of the big things that you can take to kind of help you whenever you're riding, and then normally located underneath the saddle, hence the name saddlebag, is just a small toolkit that you can take with you. That way, if you do get into any issues, even if you can't necessarily repair it yourself, if you've got the tools with you, hopefully a friendly passing cyclist with maybe more technical expertise than you, at least if you've got the tools, if you've got the equipment, they'll be able to help you out rather than having to donate things from their toolkit. So the normal things that you take in a saddlebag would be a spare tube, maybe a tire lever to assist getting that tube off. If you have a pump on your bike, all well and good. If you have small tube patch kit as well, these used to be a very involved deal whereby you'd scuff up the tire and then you'd get some glue and you'd wait for the glue to semi-cure and then you'd put a small patch on there and you'd put more glue on. A lot of them now, the tube patches are very easy, just peel and stick and go. So that's become a great advantage. And then the other thing would be a small multi-tool. It's one of the benefits of having a massive toolkit around you is most of the time you don't need to have a multi-tool. Not there. So a multi-tool would be a small collection of like Allen keys, or even a smaller version of this. So this would be a small Allen key set that I might take with me if I was doing a very long bike trip. But for a shorter trip, you'd have one of these, but it would be far smaller, and it would kind of fold up much like a Swiss Army knife. You can carry that in your toolkit with you. That way, if you do run into any issues, if bolts start to come loose, then you can get those snugged down, even if it's just enough to get you home until you can either take it to a shop or use better, larger, more forceful tools to get the job done. Having a small multi-tool with you can sometimes be a real lifesaver and get you out of trouble. So having something to be able to repair a flat tire, so yeah, a tube, a patch kit, some way to inflate the tube, tire lever to take the tire off, pretty much everything of the small tools that you need for the tube changing part of tonight, in addition to a small multi-tool. That would be the bare minimum that I'd leave the house with. If you, and I always used to break up the amount of gear or spare equipment that I take with me into 25-mile segments. So if I was doing 25 miles or less, I'd have one tube and one CO2 cartridge. If I was doing a 50-mile, I'd have two and two. 75, 3 and 3. So the longer you go, the more chance you are of getting repeated flats, and so the more equipment you need to carry with you. And if that won't fit into a bag, some cycling jerseys will actually have pockets in the back. You can kind of stuff them down, or if you need to take a larger bag with you. But apart from that small mini toolkit that you can throw in a small saddlebag and carry with you, probably the other real big thing, which is an absolute must when you're riding in Oklahoma, would be a water bottle. A water bottle in a cage to actually keep it on your bike, because this is literally the state of hydrate or die. So when the temperatures go way up, one bottle minimum, 2 bottles preferable.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Yeah, I have one on my bike. Unfortunately, I haven't had a flat yet out there, but I know it's a matter of time.
Yeah, I always say to people when they ask, how can I make sure that I don't get a flat? And sadly, the only true answer to not getting a flat is not ride your bike, which is kind of defeats the purpose. If you ride your bike, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So if you've got some knowledge base behind you, if you've got the tools with you, I say even if you can't necessarily do it yourself, people are way more likely to help you on a trail or a roadside assistance kind of scenario if you've got the tools and you can provide them, and they just need to provide the labor. One thing I will say as far as the tube changing, and just to very quickly touch on that as well, whenever I used to do tube changing classes, I would do them indoors with tubes that were perfectly fine. They weren't punctured. I would just dump all the air out of them, and we would do the tube changing class like that. You don't have to have a flat to change a tube. You just have to have tube that you dumped all the air out of, and you can go through the motions, and you can go through the stages and the step-by-steps on how to do it, so that when it happens out in the real world, you've got that muscle memory built in. So I always say, like pick a couple of times a week where you can just like sit down in the comfort of your own home and do it with all the great things around you, like beer or wine or a cup of coffee, whatever your poison is, and just kind of sit down and do this. So when you're doing it for the first time, you're not out in the wilds and there's a storm front coming in, you got to panic. You can kind of build up your own personal expertise working on your bike, so that you know it inside and out. But you don't have to wait till you get a flat to repair a flat. You can simulate that at home just by dumping all the air out of your tire and going at it.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. Final question, is this video being recorded? Can someone view Marty's presentation at a later time? Yes, we are recording this. We'll have it on YouTube, and we'll also post it to our website later. Marty did also put together a document that has a lot of this information, and he said that was available to share. So we'll post that to our website also. Maybe by the end of the week, we'll have that available. So be on the lookout for that.
And
I'm sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry. I was going to say, in that the handout, which was a document which I provided to Jordan, on the last page of that, there is my works email. If there's anything that comes up specific for your bike, if there are any questions that, if you're watching this as the recorded video later and you have any questions specific to your bike that you want answered, email, that works email, that's contactable. You totally feel free just to shoot me a note, and I will try to get back to you as soon as possible.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you for your time and your presentation. This is really good information. Like I said, this is recorded. We'll have it on YouTube, hopefully by the end of the week, so you can share that out with your friends. But again, thank you, and we'll be back next Tuesday for bicycle commuting as a parent. And again, that's Tuesday at 7 o'clock. So thank you, Marty, and thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.